The nurses said that, if he did wake up, it was likely that he was going to be a very different person permanently. First, I'm wondering, is he going to wake up? And then I'm wondering, who's he going to be? Is he going to know who I am?
I'll never forget the immense feeling of relief that came over me when she walked in the room and I knew who she was. And she said, "You made it." And up until that point, the thought hadn't occurred to me that I wouldn't make it. I just didn't realize that I was dying. It seemed impossible. All of those brainstem functions basically had left me. The first thought that occurred to me when I came out of surgery was, how could I have almost died without marrying Erica?
My name is Erica, and I'm a psychologist.
My name is Chinna. I'm a school psychologist. We met actually as competitors for a graduate program at the University of Texas and had this interview, but I found myself spending the day just kind of looking for reasons to talk to her.
We exchanged numbers to catch a drink and debrief after interview.
And even though we were competing for the same spot in a program, we both fortunately were accepted. We moved to LA for her training, and I kind of had one foot in the door still in Texas and then another here with her. But something that helped me get used to this new city where I didn't really know anybody was there was a boxing club in the neighborhood where we had moved.
Which I was really happy about. Getting into boxing was actually really wonderful for both of us in that sense. He was really happy.
It was always purely as a hobby boxer. I never planned to take any fights, but I would go and spar. And one particular spar on January 20th, 2019, it was maybe a bit harder than other spars had been, but I didn't think too much of it. I was on my feet the whole time. I finished the spar, had conversations with people, drove home, spoke to Erica.
I took one look at him and he had kind of dark circles, and I was like, "Are you okay?" I had a feeling something was off, but I figured, like he said, maybe it was just a hard spar and he needed a little time to breathe and decompress.
I got in the shower thinking not too much of it, but then started to notice some neurological dysfunction. I was seeing dark circles out of both of my eyes, and I knew, okay, something is happening. And by the time I had finished the shower, I vomited. And I knew through our training that if you ever get hit in the head and then vomit, you need to go to a hospital. I was deteriorating really quickly, so I kind of had lost the ability to speak, my balance. I was paralyzed on the left side of my body. And I managed to get Erica's attention from the other room by thrashing on the ground loudly. And thankfully, she was on a work call, but heard me and came and checked on me and knew, and she called 911.
His eyes were rolling in the back of his head. So it was really scary. I didn't know much about what to do in that moment other than to keep him awake. That was the best I could do. So the paramedics got there really quickly. The team agreed and they said he probably has a concussion. We're going to go to the Marina Del Rey hospital just down the road. So that was 2 minutes away from our apartment.
My states of consciousness were messed up. I was drifting in and out, so I lose a large chunk of time and briefly come to a room full of people saying, "Don't move, don't move. You've got a brain bleed. You're in a scanner right now. You need to be still so we can take the images." Okay, I have brain damage. How bad is it? And then I'm put under again. I'm panicked, and there's really just an intense fear that makes it hard to receive any information. But one really heads-up nurse got my attention and said, "Hey, hold on a minute, your girlfriend, her name is Erica, right?" And the nurse says, "Well, she's here, she's gonna come see you." Then the next thought was, well, if Erica's here, I know I have brain damage, am I gonna know who she is? I
was waiting in the emergency room for maybe 30 minutes before a doctor greeted me and pulled me into a back room or a side room to tell me what was going on. And it was at that point that the doctor said he had a subdural hematoma. The chances of survival don't look good. But it was like all of my clinical training, all of my experience went out the window, and in that moment it meant nothing to me other than, well, he's gonna be okay, right? So essentially a subdural hematoma is bleeding in the brain underneath the skull. In Chinna's case, he was bleeding heavily and bleeding fast, but it creates all sorts of problems neurologically, usually ultimately resulting in death unless immediate intervention happens.
And they would say that a subdural hematoma has a mortality rate of 50 to 90%. So very few people that live, and amongst those who survive, only about 20 to 30% regain any amount of brain function. So if it's not death, then persistent vegetative state is the most common outcome by far.
I was transferred to a different waiting room and I spent about 7 hours while he was in surgery, just wondering and waiting what was going on and what was going to happen. The nurses collected me from the waiting area I was in and mentioned that, they were going to try to wake him up, but they weren't sure if he was going to wake up. He was intubated, right? He was covered in wires. His head was fully shaved. He was covered in blood. It was terrifying to see him that way and to look at him and wonder if he was going to wake up again. When he woke up, he was extremely agitated, so he was not able to talk and not able to really look straight. It wasn't clear whether he was recognizing anyone or ripping at all the wires and needles and things sticking out of him. So a few nurses were there and had to hold him down and give him a sedative so that he would stop. And so, from that point, it was just another waiting game. Like he did stabilize, they said that he was going in the right direction, but he just needed to sleep.
Basically half of my skull was removed to give the brain that space to swell, and a drain was attached to the back of my skull. The swelling was so bad in my brain that you couldn't even tell that the bone had been removed for a little bit. My head was shaved and I had 70 staples in my skull, but other than that, I couldn't really tell. The dimensions of my head remained the same. And then as time went on through the recovery and the swelling went down and I was icing, then you could see my head was concave.
That he was alive and he could look at me and talk to me and we could cry in relief together was, it was nothing short of a miracle, right? I still had this sense of, we're not out of the woods yet.
I didn't have command of my body. I was in a lot of pain from the waist down and I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to use my legs again, period.
So relief, but also a lot of fear, a lot of uncertainty. The thing I never lost sight of is that I needed to be there for him, and that was as much for him as it was for me.
The initial hospitalization after the surgery was about a week. And over the course of that week, there was some physical therapy and occupational therapy that was attempted. And that was basically them forcing me out of bed and kind of holding me up and getting me to take some steps, which at the time, if you were to look at some footage of my first steps, it looks awful and sad, but we were over the moon that I was able to move, period. And it was a celebration. We were grateful, but really in my mind, all I was thinking was, please just let me stay in bed, because I'm in pain and I'm tired and it hurts to do this, and I didn't want to do any of it. But even from being in the bed over the course of the week, I demonstrated the ability to move a bit if I had enough people to support me, and I was improving in my states of consciousness. Like, I was only awake for maybe 30 minutes in a day, and then by the time I was discharged, I was able to stay awake for an hour or even 2 hours, and then I had to sleep.
Yeah, good luck with everything.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate everything.
Thank you. Changing your regular clothes?
Sure.
Hi, Chinna.
Hey, Dad.
How are you?
I'm good. Did you get all that?
Yeah, very good. I think so.
Extreme close-up.
Yeah.
So going home was great, but it still basically went from laying in a bed in pain in the hospital to now writhing in pain at home in a bed. So it took some time before I was able to do some of these self-care activities of daily living myself. Here I am needing somebody else to wash me. I felt like I had lost my place in the world as a independent adult, but slowly in my mind, relatively quickly compared to others with this injury, I did manage to start walking without other people holding me up after maybe 2 weeks or so. A big part of it was once I began outpatient physical therapy, the first thing that we worked on was relearning how to use my eyes, and that surprisingly clicked. Eventually stopped feeling like the world was constantly shaking, and once that happened, then I was able to take my first independent steps without being held up, and we started taking walks together as a family. That was humbling to have gone from somebody who could box to now being completely out of breath and struggling to walk a couple of blocks to the beach. It was about 3 weeks, and one day, once we made our way to the sand, Erica and my parents put their hands out to catch me if I fall, and they're saying, you can do this, we know you can do this. And I take that first step and I don't fall, and suddenly everything just kind of clicked in terms of how to use my body the way that I used to. Then, very bold of Erica, she throws the Frisbee to me and I catch it. And I'm like, wait, my body still knows what to do. The old me is still in here. And that was the first day that I truly believed maybe I can be okay again. But it wouldn't have happened if she wouldn't have told me I could do it.
Six months into his recovery, when things started to feel like maybe he's going to make a full recovery. As soon as everything started to kind of settle back in to what things used to feel like, that's when I realized, like, oh, I haven't been taking care of myself, and I never fully processed what happened. At the end of the day, it was what people saw was a miraculous recovery, and us coming together in a really beautiful and inspiring way, right? So we got so much praise and so much like, oh, this is wonderful, it's just a good thing, like, he's alive, what more can you ask for? Finding my own identity again was part of healing. Figuring out how to explain all of this to him in a way that wasn't overwhelming, because, you know, ultimately he was still recovering. Physically, he had made so much progress, but emotionally things were still very raw. He was still learning how to manage really strong feelings when they came up. So it wasn't as simple as saying, I'm not doing great, and here's the reasons why, right? There was a lot of trial and error that went into having those conversations. So part of the healing was figuring out how to talk about it, and he very much had to figure out how to hear it and how to hear it respectfully.
Since living in California, we've made a little tradition out of taking trips to Catalina Island for birthdays. Her birthday is in July, and I thought, why don't we do something a little bit different? Let's take a tour of the island. Let's take an e-bike tour and get some views. So we take this e-bike tour, and it's us two and then one other person who, unknowingly to her, was a professional photographer. And once we got to the most scenic overlook, I got down on one knee and got some pictures of the moment, and of course, she said yes. And
if I'm being completely honest with myself and with you, and I had a lot of mixed feelings in that moment. I'd already decided that I wanted to marry him, so it wasn't a question of whether that was a yes or a no, but the feelings were like, yes, there were a lot of really big things that we just recently went through and that we were still working through. After that flood of emotions passed and I saw the ring on my finger, I was thrilled, and we were in this beautiful place, and I decided, like, I'm going to try my best to compartmentalize all of the really difficult stuff and remember that this is my person and we have a weekend to celebrate.
don't cry, don't worry.
Okay.
Oh my God. I'm not gonna even cry. I love you so much. Dearest Chinna, when I think about our love story, I'm reminded of our first introduction over 8 years ago.
I remember how quickly my heart swooned. My crush was immediate and certain. I'm reminded of our young love full of immaturity and excitement. I'm reminded of our adventures and all of the challenging experiences we've shared. From Austin to Paris to LA and everywhere in between. From raising a puppy together to getting married during a global pandemic/plague.
I had two coherent thoughts between coming to briefly while being scanned at UCLA and then after regaining consciousness following neurosurgery. And the first thought in the scanner was, my life is going to be different. The second thought was, I can't believe I haven't married her yet. I will never forget the feeling of relief I had when I recognized who you were as you walked into that room in the ICU. I've said so many times over these last couple of years that I am unbreakable. But the truth is that losing you in that moment would have broken me.
I'm reminded of the moments of immeasurable pain and heartache and how we always found our way to loving each other deeper and more profoundly. I didn't realize then, but I see how each of those moments were an addition to the unshakable foundation we've laid for our marriage. I'm reminded every day of the ways I'm lucky to be your partner and why I chose you today and every day for the rest of my life.
The Ninja Warrior train got rolling in 2019 as well. So I had spent the course of our relationship just half jokingly telling her family, like, oh, if I was gonna go do a game show, I'd do Ninja Warrior. Like, I could totally do that. And one day her mom texts me and says, hey, Ninja Warrior is taking applications. Why don't you do it? And I took it as a joke at first, to be honest. We went and visited her mom for the holidays and went to a children's trampoline park that has a Ninja Warrior course on it. And I filmed a Ninja Warrior submission video at this 8-year-old obstacle course. We just had fun with it. I thought that would be the end of it, but Ninja Warrior was like, hey, your story is unbelievable. If you could submit another submission video with you doing some actual feats of athleticism, we would love to give you an opportunity. And so I did that, and then I was invited to go and compete. And after the first time I did that, I was like, you know what, I think I could actually become better at this, and this is fun, and I want to keep going with it. And so that's how that started.
Let's just say I was kind of like primed and prepared for that kind of thing to happen, because Chinna's always been like a daredevil, always very physically active. I think one of the big difficulties we had during his recovery was me eventually having to say, you need to slow down. So for the longest time I was encouraging him to try new things and to, get out of his comfort zone and challenge his body. And then once he realized he could do stuff again, he wanted to go sprinting on a treadmill. He wanted to do things that could put him in very serious danger before his head was fully recovered. So I knew the time would come eventually for Chinna to get back into contact sports. I've watched him practice, and I see how he takes care of himself. He tends to wear a helmet when he's doing higher up obstacles. So yeah, it was okay. And if anything, I was really excited to see him so excited about something, and to have the opportunity to apply to the show and then get invited on. It was next level, and I was so proud of him. So unconditional love, I think, is showing up for someone in the way that they need, not in the way you believe that they need, right? So it's really making an effort to see the other person for who they are in that moment, what they need, and realize that if you're going to commit yourself to someone for a lifetime, then what they need and who they are might change over time.
I just assumed my time on this earth would be infinite and I would never die, and I never had to face any of these issues, and that I could take my time proposing to her and with really needing to grow psychologically and emotionally. And instead, I did experience the things that people with major brain injuries do, like these emotional, affective, behavioral things. I won't complain about how my body is different from how it used to be because I'm an acrobat now. And the things that I think about now and that I prioritize is the emotional relationship, psychological side of these things. I needed to grow to meet her needs and not only process this trauma, but to show up as the partner that she needed for her own trauma, and learning how to communicate and how to hear her and how to demonstrate this commitment and truly unconditional love for her. That's the goal every day, and that's what I'll continue to work on, and it'll never be done. It's not something that will just be achieved. That's a practice.